Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. I have regrets. Regrets are something I don't have often, but today I have regrets. Let me explain. See this beautiful forest around me? I've been looking for a site for the last hour and a half. Now, do I regret coming to the forest? No. Do I regret coming on a weekend? Yes I do. However, I'm going to take myself and turn around and go back the way I came and then just keep driving and figure it out. An hour and a half is a long time for me to have to look for a campsite. Normally it doesn't take that long. Normally I can find something, unless it's one of those days where it's like there's nothing. But it seems as though I am here during a very, very busy time for people having reunions. I've pulled down into 2 different campsites to see like 50 people at them. 50 people is a lot of people. So, as a result, my timing is just poor. This is a me problem, not a them problem. They're just out there doing their thing. I'm here on a weekend. I'm here on a Saturday. If I would have come tomorrow, it probably would be cleared out because Sundays typically aren't as busy. But I came on a Saturday. So with that, there are going to be some challenges. So back down this dusty road I go, hoping to find something. The good news is, this will be great views for you guys. It's beautiful here. Now, what exactly am I looking for? When I look for a campsite, it depends on kind of what I'm going to be doing in the area as to what I'm looking for. I don't really sit and stay very frequently, so I don't need to find the perfect campsite. I don't need to find a place that I can be hanging out for like a week or 2 weeks. I just don't. That's not my intention. My intention is to find something comfortable, to find something that is going to be partially shaded, and to find something that, in this particular case, even though the sky looks pretty blue, in the back, it's starting to look a little like a storm is brewing. So I want something that's going to be on a more solid surface. I don't want anything that's going to potentially be super, super rutted up, because if it does rain, I don't want to get stuck. So those are the things that I'm looking for today. And unfortunately, because again, it is a weekend, makes it a little harder to find those things, because those are usually the first things that are taken. Now, if there wasn't the possibility of a pretty gnarly storm this evening, I wouldn't care as much about those criteria because it wouldn't be anything problematic. However, here at the higher altitude, they do get a lot more moisture, and so it is a real issue if I can't find those things. Simply because, well, let's be real. I'm not trying to be out here in a place that I already don't have service and then be stuck. Nope, that doesn't sound smart. I don't mind staying in places that I don't have service, but I try to be very careful with my criteria whenever I do, so that I put myself in a place where I can be successful as opposed to putting myself in harm's way. I think that that's smart. And a lot of people ask me, how do you pick your campsites? Well, that's kind of it. If I have service, I'm willing to go a little bit deeper and further. However, if I don't, I am a little bit more cautious. For example, I'm looking at this road and it does go further back, but it gets pretty rough up there. And that roughness in a rainstorm equals a stuckness. Definitely speaking from experience on this one. I've been to enough places where I've seen people get stuck, or I have almost gotten stuck, that I'm just like, Even though I have my recovery boards, it's just not worth it sometimes. It's just not worth it. So, looks like there's a couple of RVs in the good spot, so I'm going to just turn around and keep it moving again. Now, the other thing I do is I read reviews, and if I have a point, for example, and it says, oh, beyond this, it gets really bad, I'm going to trust those people, especially if they say that it's a 4-wheel drive or high clearance preference there. Because if they're saying that, that means that they were either almost in a lurch or they have one of those things and they were able to do it, but they noticed that it was a little bit more rough. So those are all things that I take into consideration when looking for a campsite. Now, there's a few things that I've noticed that some people do when they come out to a campsite that realistically you're not supposed to do. How many times have you gone out looking for a site, whether it's on BLM land or National Forest land, and you found something that you're interested in that might be a long site or a continuation of a site or a road through, and you've noticed that someone has blocked that off? I've seen that more than a handful of times. And let me explain why this is a problem. This is the public recreation area. Everyone has the right to be in any spot that they want to be in, even if you don't like it. And I've noticed that, like, for example, when I was in courtside, there's tons of room, but people would put out huge amounts of cones to, like, rope off an area so all their friends could come and hang out, and then they could have extra space to do whatever they wanted. And that would take up portions of the areas that the public is otherwise able to recreate in. Sometimes those cones or ropes would then interfere with the right-of-way of roadway. That's a problem. Whenever I was in Prescott, same thing. There was a campsite that was kind of like a little pull-off campsite. These people didn't want anybody else camping there, so they coned off the area, and in doing so, they did something that's technically wrong. You're not supposed to ever cone off a site just so someone else can't go there. I talked to a ranger about this once, and he was very, very specific about the rules. You get the space that you are in. That's it. It doesn't matter if you don't like it if other people aren't there. You are not supposed to, at any point, rope off or cone off an area. Because unfortunately what happens is sometimes those cones are just for your campsite. But other times, they might lead to another campsite, and you've now blocked the right of way. And so, as a result, I think if you have cones, you should have them for roadside assistance purposes only, and you should never use them at a campsite, because what you're doing is wrong. And that's according to the rangers and the Forest Service officers. And I had lots of conversations with those guys. And I try to learn as much as I can, so I'm making sure that I'm doing the right thing. So if you have people who are supposed to meet you there, that's not their problem. You're not supposed to do that. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do you care? Well, because while I've pulled in today, I've seen at least 2 campsites that are actually roadways that are completely blocked off by cones, which means no one can stay there because those people were stingy and decided to take up the entirety of the space because they didn't want a neighbor, because they don't like people in their space. And I don't like people in my space either. So it's not like I'm like, ooh, everyone come to my space. But at the same time, I try to be by the book and by the rules. And I know that's not a popular thing, especially amongst those who do like to use cones. And it's a harsh reality that nobody wants to hear whenever you're told it's wrong. Okay, this is a big no. This is a big no. This is exactly what I was talking about not wanting to stay in a place that looked like it was flooded. So let me move on, see if there's anything else up here. It looks as though there is more in that direction, but again, there's a lake right here. The only way to get to that site would be to cut across, and I guess I could do that and then just stay there. This might work. Oh, it looks like there's another entry up here. This might work. Yeah, this actually might work. I have a fire ring. Now, the next question is, what constitutes a campsite? That's an interesting one too. Okay, everything looks good. Everything looks good. Now, the technical definition of a campsite, again, according to those same rangers, is that the campsite should be on an established road that is not just a road that somebody has made by driving through it. For example, at Lake Mead, Government Wash started out with a couple of roads, and then people started just willy-nilly going off and figuring out their own paths and creating all these other roads, which is ultimately part of the reason that it got shut down. However, it has to be an established roadway that the Forest Service has come out and created, or that the BLM has created, or someone in an authoritative place has created. Now, the next thing that's supposed to determine if it's a true campsite or not is if there is an established fire ring. Now, an established fire ring can be a few different things. First and foremost, an established fire ring could be one of those circular metal fire rings. Those are perfect. In areas like this, a rock fire ring also indicates an actual campsite. But you have to be careful with the rock fire rings because people can create those in any place. And if they do, and it's not a real campsite, then you could be camping somewhere you're not supposed to still. So it's very important to know if it's a true camping area or not. Now, I'm probably going to reposition the van because it is parked very much so in the sun, but I thought this was a good way for me to at least get out and check the campsite, which is something that I always do before I actually stop. It's a beautiful space. Looks like it has nice tree coverage. I'm trying to figure out where I could park. That might be a little shaded because otherwise the van's gonna be way too warm. I'm also curious to see what else is around here, but this is a good option. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm going to kind of back in to this section over here so I can be partially shaded. And I may just call it a day here. I'm not sure. I haven't decided. There are some other campers over here and back here. So I feel good about that. They're not too close. They're not too loud. The campsite itself looks pretty clean. I don't see any trash anywhere. So I feel pretty good. I will do a good one over though, just to make sure. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to find camping and sometimes it's not ideal. This is not the perfect campsite by any means. It's just not. It's kind of in the entry here from the road. So I know people are going to be coming and going, and that's not great, but it's not terrible. And in an area on a weekend, this may just be a necessary evil. We'll see though, we'll see. Okay, so now that I'm here, I have a couple projects to do. And while I'm doing those projects, let's talk about camping in general. What are you supposed to do and not supposed to do whenever you're camping in a place like this where I do have some neighbors, and how to be a decent neighbor. We've already talked about the rules with how to and not to block off a campsite. I think that's really important. But the other things are, even if you're in a national forest, you should be respectful of others. I understand that national forest camping is primitive camping, and so realistically it's the wild, wild west out here. However, common decency is still very important. So if you are camping in the national forest, don't be the obnoxious neighbor. Everybody's out here recreating and trying to enjoy their space and time, and the fastest way to have a neighbor who is upset with you is to do something that is loud, obnoxious, or putting them in harm's way. For example, always pay attention to the burn bans in the area. If you are in an area and there is a high fire risk, don't have an outdoor campfire that can get out of hand. Just don't do it. And if you do have a campfire, make sure that you fully extinguish the campfire. In fact, there's been signs all through Arizona, Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, all the places that I've been that say you need to drown your campfire. And that doesn't just mean, oh, cover it up and let it smolder to death in the night. No, you need to be using water to pour it over the entirety of the fire, turning the fire, and then doing the same thing. So that's being a responsible neighbor. But there's a few other things that you can also do to be a responsible neighbor. Another thing that you can do is observe quiet hours. Even though you're out here in the national forest and you can do what you want, or you're on BLM and you can do what you want, making sure that what you want to do doesn't impair your neighbors doing what they would like to do is very important. Because ultimately, again, we're all out here trying to recreate. So don't be the loud, obnoxious neighbor who's playing music at like 11 o'clock at night or later than that. Also, don't be the neighbors who are being so loud that it's just like off-putting to everyone. Again, you can come out and have a good time, but just be mindful that if you do have a neighbor that's within earshot, sound travels really, really well in areas like these because there are, unfortunately, not a lot of those other sounds to like cancel out the noise. So you're just in quiet and dark. And if you're making really loud noises, that comes across really quickly to others, and you're more likely to have a conflict with a neighbor. Now, why does it matter if you have a conflict with a neighbor in one of these places? You might be thinking, I have the right to do whatever I want. And yes, you do. However, these days, people aren't as nice as they used to be. And a lot of these people really do not enjoy confrontation in like a positive way. In fact, the few times that I have seen confrontations in the forest or on BLM, they've been very ugly and escalated very quickly. And so that's why you just shouldn't make it weird for yourself, especially if you're solo camping, because who's going to back you up? No one. The next thing that I would say is definitely a rule of thumb is if you have big, bold, bright lights, don't use them. If you have colored lights, don't use them all night long in an obnoxious fashion. Now, let me explain. When Riley and I stayed at a lake in Arkansas. It was absolutely beautiful, but the next night we had a neighbor who pulled in, and with that they decided to set up these spotlights in every direction. It was otherwise a dark sky place. Guess what? It wasn't fun. It wasn't fun for us. It was one of those things that when you'd go outside, when it was dark sky, your eyes could adjust and then you could see everything. But with a spotlight, it takes away the ability to see basic things. And it makes it kind of dangerous because ultimately that makes it scary for anyone other than yourself. Sure, you're protecting your perimeter and that's fine. But think of other people also. Not only were the lights shining directly into Riley's rig, but also they were so bright that if you stepped outside, if there would have been a bear or a deer or a snake or a person for that matter, you couldn't have seen them at our campsite because all you could see was the brightness of their lights. And it was not great. And again, I'm not a complainer, so we just ended up moving on the next day. But the fact of the matter is, in public spaces, you shouldn't create that public nuisance for others. It's not about you having all the things your way. It's about you having the things your way, but being respectful of others in their space as well. And if your space encroaches upon their space, it's no longer a good experience for anyone. Now, if you're at like a public event or something, it is a little bit more understood because there's lots and lots of people. And so people who are in that area have the ability to see, hey, this is a gathering. And so it just kind of is what it is. But when you are an individual, you shouldn't have disco lights going off on your van constantly 24/7. You shouldn't have underglow lights taking away from the natural spaces all the time. You can have that, and you can protect yourself from critters and rodents through motion detector lights, but they shouldn't ever be something that's so bright and bold that they come out and, like, again, ruin someone else's experience. If you wouldn't want your experience ruined, don't ruin someone else's. So the rule of thumb is always, if you have a generator and you need it, park away from people. If somebody parks right up on you and you have to run your generator, you can't really do anything about that. But if you're parked within a distance that is a sizable distance, that person can't complain about the fact that you have your generator running. They just can't, because realistically, there's a distance there. However, you also need to be mindful and aware that there's a difference between you needing something and you just wanting to do that just to be kind of a jerk. And I feel like sometimes there are people who just want to be jerks in the forest because ultimately they want the whole forest to themselves. People who put up cones to block off things, that's a jerk move. People who have strobing lights in a public space not only is disruptive to the people but also the animals. That's a problem. But then here's a big one. A jerk move. Leaving your trash. Super jerk move. Don't be that person. If you come to recreate in a public space, you better be picking up after yourself. And the reason I say that is because if you want to come back to that spot, it won't be there next time if you don't pick up after yourself. So that is my biggest rule of thumb for you guys. Now, that being said, why am I talking about all these things just because I couldn't find a campsite today? Well, because a lot of you guys have asked me over and over and over again to explain this a little bit more when it comes to public lands, because you're interested in coming out to places that don't necessarily have running water or toilets or things like that, and you'd like to be able to enjoy some of the spaces that we do have here in our wonderful, amazing country. However, you don't understand the rules of it. And so today, I just wanted to take this time while I was searching for this campsite to explain a little bit more of some of the ins and outs. You know, there are some amazing spaces here for us to enjoy, but we have to be good stewards. And being a good steward isn't just about coming out at the right time and finding the right campsite. It's about what we do with that campsite once we're here. We have to remember that the public lands are paid for by everyone in our country. They are taxpayer-funded lands. And because of that, we have the privilege of being able to stay in some really amazing places like the one that I'm about to stay at tonight. But with great privilege also comes great responsibility and learning the rules, the ins, the outs, taking the time when you can to talk to a ranger, learning things, and then, again, being a good neighbor. Because ultimately, these places only exist as a result of our neighbors. Yes, we pay our part. Indeed we do. However, so does everyone else. And so by us coming out and us thinking that the spot is just for us, we're actually doing a disservice to the very people who also fund those sites. And I think that's the bigger picture. So whenever you're getting out and you're recreating and you want to have a loud group of people, and then you have a neighbor down the way, remember, that neighbor also pays for that very land you're camping on. Remember, that neighbor has every right to be there just like you do. So even if they irritate you, guess what? It doesn't matter. That's their spot too. And so as much as, again, it freaks me out sometimes if somebody comes and parks in a large space and they park right next to me. Guess what? They have every right to be there just like I do. And it doesn't matter if I like it or not. It's just kind of what it is. Me being a jerk to them isn't doing anyone any good, because all that is a reflection of who I am, not a reflection of who they are. Now, there is a difference between having somebody be uncomfortably close and acting creepy and just being close to you. And I think that that's another story for a different day, and I'll talk about safety on an upcoming video. However, it's one of those things that we have to start understanding a bit better. Because as much as we would love to think that, oh, it's Saturday and it's packed and there's so many people, we're still privileged to be able to use this land. So even if there are extra people here, we're all here living this life together. And I think that's the bigger picture. I have criteria for what I'm looking for whenever I'm traveling, as does every single person who is out here. So as much as I made a mistake by waiting until the weekend to come out, it's not their problem any more than it's their problem that, I might be having a bad day. I've camped in a few places where people have gotten into arguments and just started screaming at each other. And in doing so, the sound carries, and it becomes a very scary situation for everyone surrounding you when that happens. Because guess what? You don't know if somebody's a loose cannon. You don't know if they're mad. You don't know if they're carrying a very bad weapon of some kind. And in a small space, even though it's a large space, an expanse of acres upon acres, if somebody has an emotional breakdown moment where they do something really stupid, it could impact everyone, which is why we just want to keep the peace, chill, enjoy our space, and make sure that we're mindful of others. Remember, guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time. I'm going to finish this job with my patches. I'm going to figure out what exactly I'm going to do, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Until next time, guys. Bye!